If you haven't gotten your copy of Barenaked Bravery, How to Be Creatively Courageous, then head on over to Amazon right now. It could be on its way to your house or into your device before I'm done introing this next episode. The timing of how this episode lined up to get published is absolutely perfect. Today we have Jessica Flint with us. Jessica and I recorded this conversation several weeks ago after she interviewed me for her community called Recovery Warriors. We had such a great time together that I knew that y'all would enjoy meeting her too. But then when we were working those details out, Jessica found out that I was coming through Austin on my book concert tour. And so without any hesitation, she opened up her home to my dog, Bo, and I. So last week, our internet friendship became real in the flesh. And I cease to be amazed by how welcoming and warm practically strangers can be, especially while I'm on tour. So if you're thinking about doing some brave traveling here in the future, I highly recommend it. I especially recommend leaning into the embrace of strangers when you feel like it's a safe thing to do. It is definitely an excellent exercise in trust and how to find home in yourself and amongst strangers and within other strangers as well. So before we get on to today's interview, I want to update you. The 200 free website audits I'm giving away this summer are going really fast. So if you or someone else you know is interested in getting some professional outside eyes on your bit of internet bravery, then you can head on over to emilyannpeterson.com and then scroll all the way down the homepage, and under the section of the School of Bravery, there's a spot to learn more and sign up for your free website audit. So also there's a link to it in the show notes of this episode. So I've just been absolutely loving getting to know everyone, but I know that this won't be a forever thing. So I want to make sure that you act on it now before the summer is up and before the spots run out. But free website audits and staying with hospitable internet friends is not what we're talking about today with Jessica, although I guess it does relate somewhat, because this month's theme in the School of Bravery and here on the podcast is Defiant Expectation. It's one of the 12 ingredients of bravery, and it takes a certain defiant expectation to drive around the country and stay in the homes of internet friends. That's true. But it also takes an extreme amount of defiant expectation to go through recovery of any kind. But today we're talking specifically about recovery from an eating disorder. Now, 2 weeks ago, I was able to lead a couple workshops for an eating disorder treatment facility, which was simply magical for me. It's also pretty scary because as someone who survived an eating disorder myself, I have an intimate knowledge of the bravery required to set foot in a therapeutic environment, to make those baby steps towards a different kind of life. It takes a lot of defiant expectation, and sometimes you find yourself in a really hopeless place. So the workshops that I was giving in those treatment facilities is definitely part of helping the clients there see the bigger picture and see that life is possible on the other side of the bravery that they're facing in this season of life. So Jessica Flint is definitely with me on this. She is the founder of the Recovery Warriors community, which is dedicated to educating, inspiring, and empowering people to make big changes in their life, specifically with eating disorders and mental health. So Forbes recognizes her work as a technology innovating mental health that has served millions worldwide. And I'm honored to know her, to be her guest here in Austin, and to be her friend. So if you are on my email list, then you'll probably know about this soon. But Jessica invited me onto her Recover Strong interview series, which starts on June 20th. So if you're listening to this episode when the episode goes live and you resonate with both of our stories of recovery, then you'll probably want to get hooked up with that interview series, because she and I discuss some of the darkest days that I've personally experienced during my own recovery story. I don't get to talk about that stuff very often. So if you're interested in that, then a link to that is in the show notes for this episode. Okay, enough of that. Let's talk with Jessica Flint. You're listening to Barenaked Bravery, a weekly podcast hosted by me, Emily Ann Peterson. As a singer-songwriter, author, teaching artist, and creative entrepreneur, I encounter some really fascinating stories. I'm on a mission to reveal the depth and width of bravery and its benefits to creatives like yourself. More than ever today, our world needs bravery, unique bravery, from everyone. This is the place where you find it. There is no script or censorship today because that's how these facets of Barenaked bravery are in real life. So if you're listening with little ears nearby, please know that some episodes may contain mature language and subject matter. One of the easiest ways you can share bravery with the world is to send this episode to a friend or two. Send them an email, text, or tweet, tag them in one of my Instagram posts. My handle is Emily Ann Pete, or leave us a review on iTunes. It takes seconds and can be done from your phone right now. Again, we need more bravery in the world, so let's be brave together. Are you ready for some Barenaked bravery?
I am. I wish I was naked.
It's not, I'm not ready for that yet. I'm sure I will be, maybe even by the end of this, but
Barenaked bravery, clothing optional.
So this month's theme is Defiant Expectation. And Jessica, you are here because strangely enough, we have an eating disorder in common, or at least a history with an eating disorder. Everybody has different vocabulary for how they want to refer to their things. So how do you prefer talking about that?
I like to say past history of an eating disorder because I feel like there's this concept of recovery, like you've been able to recover your life from the eating disorder. And I feel like I've successfully recovered my relationship to food and body and all of that. And so I no longer identify as having an eating disorder, but having had lived one, it's part of my past.
Cool. I just like to have those. I know that's important, having gone through it. So I know that's important. And I don't really care too much about the vocabulary, but I do know that it's important to some people. So
totally, it really is. Some people don't believe that you can fully recover. There's just the frame of reference is different for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And because you have spent so much time in the realm of recovery from an eating disorder, what do you know about those various opinions or philosophies on can you actually overcome something like that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the individual and their grit and persistence and perseverance. Those are three words that are so integral to recovery because you fall down a lot. You think you're getting better and then you have what's called a relapse and you go back to your old behavior. And I feel like it's the same with building a business or creativity. You have to keep going step after step. And sometimes you fall down and you regress to old thought patterns, limiting beliefs, and you have to get back up and reprogram yourself essentially and keep going. And so I feel like those are really integral to the recovery process and just any process of something that's difficult, has a long journey associated with it.
Mm-hmm. And I remember when I was going through recovery feeling like it was really impossible. And there were several days or weeks, months even, that I would have said no, I'm going to be living with this thing for the rest of my life. What do you know about that part of recovery, that season where it's just so dark and you can't really see the end of your own nose because it can get really dark. I think kind of a temperament or a trait that I've had is I never like to take no for an answer. So this kind of goes well with that defiance. I remember back in 6th grade, my mom, the day before our graduation, she's like, you can't go get a shirt for graduation. I want this yellow ribbed top from Wet Seal. And I was like, yeah, I am. And so I walked to the mall 4 miles and knocked on doors to get enough money to buy my $14 shirt. And then I call my mom at the mall and I'm like, can you come get me? I got my shirt. I'm going to wear it tomorrow. And that's kind of a personality trait I've had, which is with a lot of things in life is you can't tell me no. But what happens with recovery is you tell yourself no a lot. And then it's an internal battle because you're letting yourself down. So it's
there that I could be actively defiant towards my mom and say, you can't tell me what to do. I'm going to get that shirt. But then when I tell myself, you're not going to binge tomorrow, and then it's like, you can't tell me I'm not going to binge tomorrow. I'm going to binge tomorrow. You can't tell me I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do that tomorrow. And so a lot of it was kind of getting more to that part, which was the hardest struggle. And I don't know if I ever thought it was like impossible. It just felt like I was literally at war with myself. And it created so much self-hatred and shame and disappointment, loss in integrity. And so that was kind of a bigger component of it. But, I love the word impossible, because I feel like that's where you can defy expectations. Like, I think it was Audrey Hepburn that said, impossible literally says, I'm possible. And I've always felt that anything is possible, or anything you can do if you set your mind to it. But it's really like you who gets in the way of that. So recovery was a lot about me getting out of the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I guess I'm still so curious about the philosophy that you will always live with it for forever, just because I don't have that. So I'm just curious about that, like what would make someone think that? Although I know I've been there, but I'm so far removed from it. So,
well, one, I think you have to have hope. And so you have to have hope things can get better. So when hope is diminished, that kind of light, then I think it is kind of like, I'm always going to, or more like a recognition of what I see in my present reality is my reality. And, I love the topic of like law of attraction and manifestation and all of that. And a lot of it has to do with getting to where you want to be by envisioning yourself already there. And some people don't like to access that part of their imagination and that space in their head. They find that scary and like off limits because it's not anchored in reality. So I think a lot of it is just more of a temperament where someone's like, I can fully do this. And if you give yourself the opportunity to fully do it, then you're allowing yourself to make like that possibility. But if you are kind of constraining it and saying that I can't do this isn't possible, well, then that's what you're going to get. Like, you're going to get a partially recovered life, or this notion that you can't fully recover.
I know with other things where I've been like looking at an obstacle or a challenge, or my health diagnosis of my right hand, looking at that going like, this is absolutely just, we're screwed. Like, give up now. And one of the ways that I was able to kind of pry into the impossibility was to find a vision for possibility, was to basically kind of create a like, okay. So sure, it's impossible. But if it was possible, what might it look like?
Yeah.
So it's like basically giving the voice that's saying, that's yelling about how impossible it is, like giving that validation and going, yes, it could be impossible. So thank you for what you're, thank you for your contribution. Sit tight while I go listen to everyone else's opinions, and then ask various kinds of what if scenarios with a scientific curiosity, because that scientific curiosity gives you like a little bit of emotional distance to make a more reasonable choice that isn't like so emotionally volatile,
Yeah. What I love about that, Emily Ann, is it allows you to kind of access all the parts of self. So that part that's like, that can't happen. Like if you try to completely pretend that part doesn't exist, then you aren't really like fully in reality, because there is that part of you. And some people have that maybe stronger than others, or like at different times it gets more enforced and stronger in intensity. But yeah, exactly. I think that a lot of it is giving yourself permission to think big while still being like, okay, like I'm going to keep my feet on the ground and I'll let myself go float up for a bit and then come back down. But it's important, I think, if you are wanting to make big changes or transformations in your life, to envision your life, what it would be like if you didn't have this, or if you did have this. And I had so many journal entries of what my 2-year plan was, 3-year plan, 5-year, 10-year. And I think that's just such an important exercise to do. And looking back, many of those are no longer on my radar. I've changed course completely. But the act alone of thinking about what I want in my life 10 years from now was really helpful then to start to be like, well, am I living this? And that 10 years from now was never living with an eating disorder, right? So that kind of goes back to the idea of like, well, why did I want to make these changes, or why did I really commit to this? And it's because it wasn't part of my ultimate goals in life, right? Like it was holding me back. And that can happen with in many different forms for people, not just with their food and body issues. And so having the ability to look out, kind of that widen the focus, the 30,000 foot view is really important, because then you can narrow back in and say like, well, I'm even on the path for that. And if I'm not, what do I have to do?
Mm-hmm. And I know that those moments where you can't see your own hand in front of you, just for how crazy life is at the moment, or dark it feels, or scary it is, having already built up a ability to envision what your future could look like, even in fantastical, silly ways, like what would happen if my skin turned purple and my, like hands turned to blocks, and like weird, bizarre, like things, but just off the wall things. Have like building that muscle of imagination really helps you out when you're in those dark moments, because you're able to then access that imaginative vision of possibility muscle and go, yeah, I actually can see it's, I can't see my own hand because it sucks right now. Life is awful right now, or whatever your situation is. But I know that it can be different because I've built up that skill before. So
yeah.
How have you, so I know from my own experience that my recovery process actually gifted me with more than just recovery. It also gifted me with some of these skills that I'm talking about, like just life skills in general. But how has your recovery empowered you as a creative visionary?
I think that first and foremost, it gave me a creative idea that I've explored that has allowed me, like gave me an outlet for my creativity. And just because the company that I've built is a multimedia resource hub for eating disorders, and I've created an app and a lot of different things that people use to help themselves. And the idea of resilience is really important with creative work, in like believing in yourself and putting yourself out there. I think with recovery, like a big thing that I had to learn is that the people that I really wanted the most to show up strongly in my life weren't necessarily going to. So for a while, for many years, over a decade and a half, I really played the victim card. And I wanted them to show up, and I was going to be the worst I got. Can't you just see I'm terrible right now? Can't you see that this is a problem? And I wanted them to show up for me. And they didn't. And at the end of the day, I had to take accountability for myself, and I had to develop the archetype of a warrior stronger. I would say the archetypes I run more is the creator and the explorer archetype. But the warrior is something that I needed. I needed to become a warrior in order to fully battle for my own health, my own wellness, and my own life. And that helps now and today. Well, because my brand is called Recovery Warriors, and the next company I'm building now is called True Warrior. So obviously I like the warrior archetype, but it helps a lot now because I fight for my vision and my dream and my destiny. And that's a little powerful to say I fight for my destiny. I know my destiny because I've been very connected with trying to like really honor what my soul's come in to do. And a lot of that came from what you're talking about, is those darker moments where I couldn't even see in front of my face. In those moments is when I connected the most to just sheer source, whatever you can call it. Everybody has different interpretations, but this kind of reason for being here and why I'm here. And I asked for answers. I asked for support. I just asked for guidance. And I was very humbled, and I had to surrender, and I had to lose a lot of my ego identity. And the same thing happened in recovery, is like having to really be like, look, I think I'm supposed to be like this. I think my weight's supposed to be like this. I think I'm supposed to eat like this. Actually, I'm going to resign to the fact that I don't know what's supposed to happen. And the same with my creative work. And I've really identified with a lot of, Elizabeth Gilbert has this book called Big Magic about creative living beyond fear. And that's something, and a lot of the work you're doing with Barenaked Bravery as well, is just like this idea around letting the source run through me. Like I am the faucet, and then the sources which runs through me. And so like being able to get these ideas and inspiration and then channel them and be able to put that out into the world has been extremely helpful, because it's no longer like just me. I'm co-creating with something much more powerful than I am. And that's been really helpful. But I would have never got to that place of surrender and trust if I had not had such a rock bottom experience with recovery and with like these really dark moments where I needed to connect to something bigger than myself. And now that's just like, I wake up every morning and just say, thank you, God, for the today and for what you've done. Like I say the word God, I'm just going to I feel like I have to put a disclaimer and asterisk on it, because for so many years, I really didn't like that word. Like I was like universe, divine, like cosmic intelligence. Like I had like all these different ways to tiptoe around it. But it wasn't until like 2 years ago, and it really just sank so hard that like, when I claim that word hard and I like own it, taking away from any religions or anything. And like, I have my own framework on which I house all of this. And it's been more powerful for me, like the connection and literally feeling like I am never walking alone in my creative endeavors. Like I always have support. The money always comes whenever the runway, if I think about it, is just so beautiful. Whenever I fully lean into the trust of this, the runway always is there. And so I've been doing this for 6 years now. And like I've passed what's called the valley of death the first 3 years, which is really the hardest if you're working. Like that's when you're like having to hustle and you're not sure if it's going to work. But if it's really what you're like feel destined to do, and you've been able to separate it, is this my ego that's doing it? Partially. Your ego wants to do a lot of things. But if you're really following your heart's path and this is what you want to do, and if it's not working out, I always say, hey, look, if this isn't working out, if this isn't what you want me to do, then show me a sign. Like I can get another job. Just show me a sign. And then, next morning there's an email saying, hey, I want to give you $8,000, and you're like, okay, I'll take that email. But it's always comes for me like, and I'm hoping it gets with time, it's not as much needing to always be like, hey, I'm at the end of the line here. But, there's still those moments.
We'll get back to the bravery at hand in a second, but I wanted to remind you that I first began having these conversations both on and off the podcast because I was curious about what bravery actually meant. If we could build it, if so, with what ingredients. And I was so curious, I turned my research and personal stories of experiences with feats of bravery into a book. That book is called Barenaked Bravery, How to Be Creatively Courageous, and it's now available in multiple formats on Amazon right now. So go get yourself a copy of Barenaked Bravery, How to Be Creatively Courageous, and after you read it, let me know what you think. I think there is a direct connection between trust and defiant expectation.
How so? How do you see it?
Well, because in order to defiantly expect it, you are trusting that it, one, can happen, and two, that it should happen and that it is going to happen.
Yeah.
And so despite everything that all the other information that you're getting from the rest of the world or from your surroundings or your community or whatever, you're still defiantly expecting something different.
Totally.
And that takes a lot of trust.
A lot of trust and a lot of like pivoting though. Like, my business model has changed over the years. I've tried things, other things have worked, things haven't. Like I've had to be so scrappy in like the amount of lines I've thrown out, which is always good to diversify how you're getting revenue streams. But I've had to be persistent And I've also had to trust that, like, whatever, like, I know what the end goal, I think that's when you can have your mission be very, like, kind of clear and concise. Like, mine literally is to help people heal and give them hope and healing. That's it. So if I can always be of service and hope and healing to people, then I'm on the right path. How that works out in terms of money and like connections, that all can kind of change. And so, yeah, the part about like being defiant on your expectations is also, I just have to say, is like that patience piece is so important, because I could have given up so many times in these past 6 years, and I haven't, because I feel like I'm on my path and I love what I do, despite all the kind of stresses that can come with it. You know, being an entrepreneur, creative entrepreneur, has its ups and downs. Like, you literally have to have this in your DNA, I think. Like, you have to have certain characteristic traits in your DNA to really succeed as an entrepreneur. It's not for everybody. And I think the people who get into it just because they're like, want to make a fast buck and they like this like lifestyle, I'm not going to say there's always exceptions to the rules, but I feel like it's, you know, you really have to be in it for the long game, and you have to love creating and love the product more than the profit. And the profit will come. The profit will come, but you have to love the product and who you're serving more than the profit.
Mm-hmm. I have seen that, especially the who you're serving, to be true, because all the time there are people who want the money or the fame or the accolades, but if they aren't connecting to an actual audience, then and the problems that an audience has, and really being dedicated to solving those problems, regardless of what that means for that person's or that entrepreneur's day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Because it might mean, in some, like for me, it's meant like, oh, well, I thought that I wanted to teach a course about XYZ, but evidently you don't want that. So I don't care about, like, I'll put my ego aside and go like, fine, okay, well then let's do a different one. What do you want me to teach? Like, I'm here for you, you know?
Of course, XYZ can come up at another point in time. Like, I always realize some things are like ripe for the blossom or for the picking, and then other times you just got to be like, I'm going to shelve that.
But the asking an audience and being, and we'll tie it back in with defiant expectation, you know, defiantly expecting that you can help your audience allows you to let go of some of the strings that would have been attached otherwise.
Yeah.
You know?
I agree. I think it's all about, and what's helpful is when you have a strong alliance to your audience, like you really understand what they're going through. A lot of people do say like really and I will say I don't necessarily do that myself. I build what I want, like what I want or what I needed. And so far that's been working for me. But I've read all these things and like the lean startup model about.
Well, I mean, then now we're getting into like business models and business philosophy, and your business is based on wounds. And it just so happens that it's based on a wound that you had. And so naturally, what you want to give to the world happens to be exactly what your audience wants to receive, because they have the same kind of wound and story together. So for a lot of us entrepreneurs who have started a business or a career based on a personal experience of some kind, even if it's just simply, I'm a songwriter and I write songs about love, and hey, here's the song about the last boyfriend I had, like that resonates with someone somewhere. And because of that, then you will find an audience. So when you're like a solopreneur and you're basing your business around these kinds of wounds or story-based businesses, then you really can like go, oh, today I want to fill in the blank. And oftentimes it will match up directly with exactly what your audience wants from you too. Yeah.
And just to not be afraid of like a pivot. You know, I was watching, so Hay House, this is going to be over by the time this airs, but Hay House has their World Summit, which is just like this huge event. And it's awesome. Like you get all these thought leaders. And I was watching Wayne Dyer's video on the shift. And, you know, he's totally like big thought leader in the spiritual space. But he was a writer on more psychology topics prior. And he just, had this shift where he's like, I really want to discuss spiritual topics more now. And he had to trust that that's what the process, like that hit he had, that intuition that he needed to change. And so sometimes that can happen with an like if your audience, you're like, oh, I don't know if they're like interested in that. And you have to have the faith that if you really want this, and this is really the direction you want to go to, that either your audience is going to either follow like that audience, or you're going to build a new audience. So Wayne Dyer then stepped into this whole new persona, or not a persona, but he was able to reach way more people and influence way more lives. But it came at the risk of being like, I'm changing a little bit of what I'm doing. I'm deviating. And same with like a musician. Like maybe you're known for a certain genre of music or a certain type, and you've been typecasted, or an actor or whatever, you know? And then to all of a sudden do a different role or do a different type of music, sounds or dance, you know, is really scary. But if that's what your heart is pulling you to do, it's so important just to follow your heart. Like, I think we have a hard time in our culture, like following our heart. Because because then it's vulnerable. Like your heart can get.
Well, we really are risking stuff, and we've just come a couple months ago. We were talking about risk and rejection.
Ooh,
and
love them.
Those being an ingredient of, well, risk being the ingredient of bravery, but rejection is often what we're risking when we're being brave. And especially as creatives, like sometimes when we put ourselves out there, it's very easy for our interpretation of how that thing is received to be inferred as, oh, I am not good. Like,
yeah,
not, you don't, it's like, because there's a difference between this thing I produced in the world isn't my best work and I am not great. And so
totally, like it becomes your identity.
And when I was teaching cello lessons full time, that was a very important part of my teaching philosophy. Like anytime a student finished playing a song, rather than tell them like, good job, I liked that, well done, I would really try to say like, thoughts, what did you think? Because it really prompted my students, and now my consulting clients, because I do the same thing with my consulting clients, it really prompted them to infer that value and to find that source of validation, basically, rather than having it be externally sourced. Because the last thing I would want is like a little 4-year-old cello player to think that by me saying you played that note flat, I was saying you're a bad person. That's not it at all, So you have to be able to hold reality and your vision of possibility, that you can be a better person, or that you can be a better creative, or that you can meet your standards of excellence one day, in separate hands. You have to be able to take that like expectation in one hand and reality in the other, and then still press into the expectation.
And well, expectations is such, I did a show on this that was one of my favorites, actually. It was based off of a TED Talk that I saw for, I believe it was an Oxford researcher, and he derived it was called a subjective momentary analysis of happiness. And it was a mathematical equation that looked at what really is the variables that go into happiness, and expectations was the biggest one. And so when our expectations meet our reality or exceed our reality, we have a positive emotion. So expectation, let's just, talk about business here. Expectation is you're going to sell X amount of programs. And your reality is you sell X plus 10 and you're stoked. Okay, awesome. Now, if your expectation does not meet your reality, then you have a negative emotion. So let's say you want to get X program sold and you sell 0 on your first email going out to your audience, which is very common, by the way, guys, maybe like 1. Because your expectation's high. You're like, this is so awesome. If I can do this, I can get that. Okay, everything is going to work. And then, wah, wah. And you have a negative emotion attached to that. And so managing, this is just something I'm always learning, especially like in dating, everything. Like expectations are so important. So it's like, how can you have an expectation that something's going to work out and still have the faith, but then have the reality not match it. So it's just this really interesting, complex interplay of reality, of expectations, of your hopes, of your dreams, all of this like coming together. And then timing is really what I think is the main factor, is like when this all comes to point in manifestation in time, or if it doesn't, like why?
Yeah, I think that's the expectation factor is really, really powerful. And you also have to be able to, like, even though you have defiant expectation, in order to be brave, there's an element of holding that expectation with open hand.
Right? There is, because it's like important to have it. But at the same time, it's important to have faith that whatever happens for a reason, or like it's setting you up. So if like your expectation, you have a defined expectation and it's not met on the first go round, it's not about, laying down the sword and being like, okay, I'm done. It's about like understanding, like making sense of it. Maybe you'll never make sense of everything that happens in your life, but like understanding that that's putting you in the path to something that's coming next. And if it's still, I would always say, if it's still like really in your heart that this is what you want to do, then it's about getting back up and doing it again, maybe differently, maybe exactly the same. And, so many stories of success have a common thread of just a lot of rejection. So like we were saying, but they were defiant in their expectation of like, I'm not going to accept no for an answer, but you maybe have to get to 100 no's, 200 no's, 300 no's before you get to that yes. So there's that defiance. But in between that time, you're going to have a lot of upsets and negative emotions because your expectations are kind of high. So it is this balance, because it's still important to have your expectations, right? Like to push yourself to really think about what your bigger dream is.
Well, and I mean, I talk about this a lot, that one of the things my eating disorder gave me was a life PhD in managing expectations and managing first impressions too. Like, I pride myself on my ability to like predict what someone's going to think about something before we put it out there in the world. And now I benefit with that as a songwriter and as a consultant. I see that what it also gave you, and I would say me too, is the ability to pick yourself up after you fail. Because to go through recovery, you said earlier, you have to every day be able to take, I've heard it also referred to like take your monster out for a walk 3 times a day during meals or whatever. You have to be able to face failure on a very consistent minute by minute even basis in order to get through recovery and to live a life that you actually do want to live. And so, I mean, thank God for that, because if we did not have other women and other men who have like laid the framework for what defiant expectation can look like, then I don't know about you, but for me, I would not have been able to go through recovery because I wouldn't have had an example of the fact that it could happen, even in just like 1 or 2 other people instances,
Yeah, I'm trying to think if like other stories inspired me as much in recovery as they do in my creative work I do now with like running a business. I would say they more probably now with running a business. But I think at the time, actually, there weren't a lot of stories out there. And that's why I created this whole platform that connects all these people who have stories. And so that's been a huge thing that I put out into the world because it was absent. Like I remember I just had Weight Watchers testimonials to look at, or like those type of, it was more like that for me. But for business, yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I published my book, because I talk about my eating disorder in Barenaked, Bravery, I put the book under the eating disorder category in Amazon. And the week that it launched, it was above Janine Roth and the other girl who wrote the book, Life with Ed.
Jenny Schaefer.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's my neighbor. I love her. We go out a lot.
And I was just so, before my book popped up to above them, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm on the same page.
Yeah.
As these 2 women whose books I read when I was going through recovery, and I needed their bravery so that I could get through my recovery. And so the fact that I was like on the same page as them, that just meant so much to me. And I'm actually more honored about that than any other like success that the book has seen, just because of how grateful I am for the bravery that other people have displayed and how much that has meant to my own defiant expectation.
Totally.
Because when you see other people doing crazy, amazing things, even just as simple as like having, life after an eating disorder, it gives you that vision of possibility to rely on and then utilize your defiant expectation to move forward with it.
Yeah. Builds a lot of character.
If they can do it, I can do it, kind of thing.
Totally. And like, those are the resources that I called on. Like, yeah, both of those books were really important to me. And yeah, no, it really does build a lot of character having gone through the experience. Any type of hardship though, I mean, any recovery, addiction, or just anything that someone's had to like really face their inner demons head on is kind of super powerful and transformative. But yeah, I mean, I think another thing about Defiant, just on the theme of defiant expectations, is like, as women and men, just in society, we get kind of stuck into these binary gender roles, and just there's like kind of things that we get like put on to us, like that we need to achieve at certain times in our lives. We need to be at a certain place at a certain time, like, and or behave a certain way. And I think a lot of that is just like the defiance comes from whatever you're like is expected of you, is like being a trailblazer and going out. And sometimes that is you're going to risk isolation from community, family, friends, larger groups. People won't understand necessarily this life path or this kind of lifestyle that you're choosing. And it's really important to like connect with your center and your core truth of who you are and what makes you unique, and honor that, even if it's going to feel like you're getting alienated or rejected by others. So I think a lot of that really ties in with a lot of creatives, like, and you talk about creative misfits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this idea that you don't really fit in, and like, yeah, my like favorite quotes are always like, I would say like my all-time favorite person in the whole wide world is John Lennon. And he has this, it's weird not to be weird. It's like a quote that he's been attributed to. And it's just like, yeah, like, I don't know, like normalcy is overrated. And a lot of creative people like are able to get to that. Like, I'm different, Apple, another huge, like I sleep with Steve Jobs books next to me, is this idea of like, think different, be different. It's really amazing when you do, because that's how you push the envelope and you make big change in the world.
Yeah.
Whether it's through music or whatever.
This has been such a treat. I kind of want to end there because that's just a phenomenal way to end. So
Likewise.
Think different, be different.
Yeah. Think different, be different. Go to the beat of your own drum.
Normal is overrated. All of those things are so good. So if someone is struggling to find the defiant expectation to do the thing that they know that they are destined to do, what would you tell them?
Well, if you haven't had the calling, then I would just keep asking for the call. Be open to it. But you'll know when at least for me, you'll know when it hits you. It comes through and it's like, this is your calling. And if you ignore it, so like, I think some people, it can show up as like a little whisper. But mine literally was like, I was out at sea. I was a seagoing oceanographer. And it was like, you need to create an app for people to log their meals and behaviors, thoughts and emotions. And I was like, really? I'm a geophysicist. Why do I need to do that? And it's like, you need to do it. And I did it. And then it's helped hundreds and thousands of people and it's had millions of sessions on it. And so it's like that's just an example of how it worked for me. It's like, you just get this little calling and it can be loud and but if you ignore it, just, if you're open to it, if you're listening to this podcast, you obviously resonate as a creative. And that means that you want to use that power in some way, shape, or form. And if you don't know what that is quite yet, just be open to it arriving to you. And it could be small, it could be big, it could be a whisper, it could be a shout, but just be open to it.
Amen. Beyond your free Bravery bundle, which is always available at emilyannpeterson.com/join, your brave takeaway from today's show is to hop into the Barenaked Bravery Facebook group and tell us something that inspires a defiant expectation in your life. Maybe it is hearing other people's stories. Maybe it's seeing injustices happen around the world. Maybe it's something else. Regardless, we would love to hear all about it in the group and your other, and also your favorite parts of today's Barenaked Bravery with Jessica Flint. You can find Jessica Flint and myself on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all the other places that you probably will find us or want to find us. Go ahead and just tag us so that we can cheer you on and see what you're up to with your Barenaked Bravery. Again, the links to contact her and get in touch with everything she's doing, including the Recover Strong event registration link, is in the show notes for this episode. So that's our show this week. Thank you again for listening. We always have so much fun with our guests. And so if you have someone who you'd like to nominate for the show, go to barenakedbravery.com and scroll down all the way to the bottom in the footer. There's a link to submit a guest or nominate a guest. So we always love our guest nominations so much. They're so fun to talk to. It's like a little mini roller coaster that I love to go on. It's an exercise in resonant bravery, which is so fun to see unfold. So if you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it for you, then please give us a review and rate the show in your podcast app. It really does help us out a lot, and it's a pretty painless thing for you to do. So we ask you to do this because all of the bravery that we share in this show deserves to be spread as far and as wide as possible. And leaving a review is the most helpful and free way for you to help us out in that way. So if you're digging the music in today's episode, that's because it's brought to you by Lee Rosevere. And you can find out more about all the other artists, musicians, and other sponsors of the show by going to barenakedbravery.com/sponsors. I'm so looking forward to being with you next week. We have some awesome things in store for you as always. And until then, I have one message for you. It's this: be yourself, be vulnerable, be imaginative, be improvisational, be brave, because the world needs more of your bare naked bravery.